we've got a really great lineup of other speakers for you. I believe that Shannon sent out the agenda to everybody, but just to remind you, so we have later today, we have Senator Cruz at 1:30. We've got a gentleman from the FCC at 2 o'clock, Kirk Burgee. Tomorrow at 11 o'clock, we have Senator Cornyn. And then at 12 o'clock tomorrow, we've got Representative Van Taylor. And then on Thursday, we've got our old friend, Representative Pete Sessions. So since you're in the meeting, I know that you've gotten the link. I'm sure you've seen the agenda, and that's our program. I do want to thank our sponsors who have so graciously helped provide support for these briefings. They include Texas Instruments, thank you, Virginia, Dallas College, thank you, Debbie, Atmos Energy, City of Richardson, National Write Your Congressman, and Charter Communications. So thank you to all of those wonderful supporters of ours. John Gonzalez, I want to say a special thanks to you for securing our speaker this morning. Do you want to make any comments before I introduce Ron?
Hey, Bill. Good to see you all. No, not really. Let's just get started. You're going to do the introduction, but always happy to work with you and speak to you all and see you all as I did in every January, it seems like, and I really always appreciate the opportunity. And we know so much more now than we did back in the second week of January. So take it away.
Very good. Well, I'm pleased to introduce Ron Eidshogg, Vice President and Chief of Staff for Government Affairs at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Ron heads a team of 15 full-time lobbyists on Capitol Hill. He is the chief lobbyist on environmental, energy, and regulatory reform issues for the U.S. Chamber. And he joined the team in 1999. So he's been there 22 years, Ron?
Too long.
Well, I don't know about that. We're lucky to have somebody with your tenure there. He's got his master's and bachelor's degree in political science from the State University of New York at Albany, and he resides in Vienna, Virginia with his family. Ron, tell us what's going on Capitol Hill.
Well, things are going great on Capitol Hill. You know, you just turn on the TV, it's, you know, puppy dogs and unicorns all the time. So, you know, I think, you know, it's not a surprise. Things are tense on Capitol Hill. A lot of the reasons for that tension and you know, the bitter partisanship that we've seen, the inability to get things done, the factors that sort of lead to that are not new. I want to spend some time talking about some of those factors, how some of those factors are manifesting themselves, and sort of some of the things that we can do about that. I'm going to spend a lot of time actually talking about cloture and filibuster and all of that kind of stuff. I hate to do that. I hate to get dragged down into process, but in Washington, particularly this year, when you have Democrats in control of the presidency, the White House, the House and the Senate, how something gets done is oftentimes more important than what is actually getting done. The process trumps the policy on some occasions. So that's a big factor. But where are we now? You know, if you look at sort of the polling data that's out there, there's no surprise. 41% of Americans think that we're on the wrong track, 41-54, so we're upside down there. Depending upon the polls that you look at, Congress's approval rating is at 29%. 60% of Americans disapprove of the job that Congress is doing. Sometimes those numbers are higher than that. Again, that's no surprise. I think one of the interesting things is that President Biden's job approval numbers are just above water. 53% of Americans think that President Biden is doing a good job. In some respects, that number is unusual. Presidents during the honeymoon phase of their presidency tend to be a little bit higher than that. Contrasting President Biden's numbers to President Trump's numbers, however, is a big change. President Trump went his entire presidency without going above 50% approval rating at some point throughout his tenure. That has never happened in the Gallup poll since Gallup began doing this poll back in 1938. Like I said, Trump was never above 50%, so that's interesting. Biden's at 53%, like I said. What's really interesting is when you dig into those numbers, pretty much 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 Democrats think that Biden is doing a good job. 1 out of 10 Republicans think that Biden is doing a good job. Those numbers are 180 degrees reversed from where we were with Trump, where 9 out of 10 Republicans loved the job that Trump was doing. So we are, that polarization that is out there manifests in a couple of different ways, and certainly the approach to the president. This trend, this partisanship trend, is not new. I think it's really been growing for a long time. There have been some polls that sort of look at the bell curves for Republicans and Democrats and moderate and liberals and conservatives back in the 90s, back when Newt Gingrich and the House Republicans took the House. There was a lot of overlap in the bell curves. The traditional Democrat and the traditional Republican weren't exactly in the middle, but they were pretty close. There were a lot of shared goals and a lot of shared priorities. Those polls have grown further and further apart. And the last time the survey was taken was in 2017, and the polls were very, very far apart in terms of those two camps, the bell curves. There's very, very little common ground in priorities, in outlook, in those kinds of things among Republicans and Democrats. There was also an interesting article in the New York Times back in March, looking at the last election and sort of doing a red and blue painting of the United States. And, we were talking about demographics earlier and sort of Texas picking up 2 seats. Looking at communities across the country, there's red communities and blue communities, or there's red areas in communities and there's blue areas in communities. There's not a lot of overlap in those areas. What that means is, in our communities, we're talking to people who think like us and share the same political views. To some degree, that makes it more difficult to sort of come together with some common ground. That is reflected in Washington. There's only 6 states out there now that have a Republican and then a Democrat in the Senate. All the other states have 2 Democrats or 2 Republicans. So only 6 states have a mixed conference in the Senate. That's the lowest number since 1914, when a direct election of senators was authorized in the Constitution. So that's one of the way that you see these factors express themselves. Look, frankly, the other way is January 6th. We're at the point where we still have a National Guard presence in Washington, D.C., still big fences around big chunks of Washington. You guys have been up to our office on Capitol Hill. I couldn't drive to my office on Capitol Hill from my house in Vienna because of the fences around the Capitol. I can't. Part of this is COVID, part of this is security. I can't just go in and wander around the halls and cafeterias on the House side, on the Senate side, and go run into staff and things like that. So how the political debate has gone on has had a big effect. I don't know that is necessarily a good thing. And another way that this manifests itself is that we're always getting ready for the next election. We're already starting to talk about 22, or the House. Is the House going to flip back to Republican? What are the priorities? What Democrats and Republicans are vulnerable in the next election? And part of that is sort of the short tenures of majorities in the House and the Senate. Up until about the Clinton era, majorities were very, very durable. Republicans held the majority in the Senate for 3 terms, 3 out of 4 terms, 3 out of 4 Congresses during the Reagan era. But other than that, from the 60s, from the JFK era through the George Herbert Walker Bush era, Democrats were largely in control. Since the Clinton era, we've seen majorities flip back and forth at an ever increasing pace. The House and the Senate started as Democratic controlled with Clinton. They flipped in the middle of his first term. There was a flip during the Bush administration. The House and the Senate flipped to Republican control during the Obama administration. The House flipped to Republican control during the Trump administration, and now we're at the point where both the House and the Senate are Democratic. So that is a disincentive to compromise. When your party might be in power, why should you go for half a loaf now when you might get the whole loaf next time? And we've sort of seen that so far in the Biden presidency. We've got Bill and I were talking about this early on, that big COVID reconciliation package. The Democrats put the COVID package on the floor. It was a very, very big package, did it without any Republican votes. There was already a vote on the PRO Act. The PRO Act is dealing with all the union stuff. So it's card check on steroids. Employers have to give tons of employee information to union organizers. There's no opt-out. Right to work is repealed in 27 states. The California AB5 independent contractor status dealing with gig workers would become the law of the land. Franchisees are treated as joint employers. So the PRO Act has already passed the House. The For the People Act, HR 1, has already passed the House as well. This would politicize the FEC, more regulation of advocacy ad. It would define coordination in ways that would really limit the ability of the business community to speak and have our voices heard in terms of elections and issue advocacy. So these very, very partisan bills have already passed the House, and largely without any buy-in from Republicans. Now, the House has passed some stuff, some partisan stuff that the chamber supports. The Equality Act. There were 2 immigration acts, the Dreamers Bill and a Farm Workers Bill. Both of those passed the House. Chamber supports those bills. I think that it would have been better to see some more bipartisan legislation come in on these kinds of things. While these were U.S. Chamber priorities, they certainly were provocative. And then, we're sort of looking at what can come down the pike beyond this. There's going to be talk about guns. There's going to be talk about climate. There's going to be a lot of talk about the caring economy. And when when Democrats have this opportunity, majorities can be fleeting. They have an awful lot on their agenda. Bill, we were chit-chatting before, and Bill said, so, are there any signs for optimism? And, I've been very pessimistic up to this point, and there are some signs for optimism. I think one of the big signs is the December COVID package that got done after the election. So that was the $900 billion package. It dealt with some PPP stuff, reauthorized that, some other things. Why was that such a big deal? So if we look back to about this time last year, remember what Congress was doing. So we're in April of 2020. Congress had just passed the PPP. I think that we were in that little window where the private sector blew through the money in the PPP, and we needed to get more money injected into the small business sector. Congress was working pretty well. We got into the summer, we got into the phase 3 bills, they were done. And then we hit this point where Congress didn't get a lot done. The unemployment, the extra unemployment expired, the PPP expired, and Democratic leadership, Republican leadership, and the White House were not able to agree. They weren't able to agree on what that next COVID package was going to be. The Problem Solvers Caucus came together. Problem Solvers Caucus is a group of a couple dozen Democrats and Republicans. They have to be paired up. So if you want to join the Problem Solvers and you're a Democrat, you got to bring your Republican buddy with you. The Problem Solvers got together about Thanksgiving time and came up with a package, with the blueprint of a package of about $900 billion. That set the stage for negotiations that ultimately happened and ultimately led to success in December. That was a big deal. When you're in a 50-50 Senate, when you're in the scenario where Nancy Pelosi only has a majority of very few seats, a very, very small handful, like 5 on any particular vote, you need this bipartisan, you're going to need some Republican votes likely to get some things done. The Problem Solvers came together, and that's ultimately what was passed. So that was a big deal. On the Senate side, we see some glimmers of hope as well, where you've got the Gang of 10, the Gang of 20, groups of not leadership coming together with some priorities. Infrastructure is one of those big things that we're talking about right now. The president has laid out a very, very ambitious infrastructure package. That infrastructure package could, in many instances, go under reconciliation, under just partisan exercises. There's a lot of talk about throwing a lot of other things beyond infrastructure into that package, a lot of climate stuff. But we've also seen a lot of work, particularly on the Senate side. The Senate would like to get an infrastructure bill through the regular order process. Senator Shelley Moore Capito is the chair of the Environment and Public Works Committee. That's the committee that's going to write the transportation portion of the transportation bill. And if that's not an oxymoron, I don't know what is, the transportation portion of the transportation bill. She and her fellow co-state senator, Joe Manchin from West Virginia, have been sort of working on a bipartisan package to be a blueprint on the core transportation pieces. That's a good thing that that we're starting to see some movement on. Another cause for optimism is the don't call it an earmark, bringing earmarks back. This idea has come out of the House side, where there's going to be community funding projects, perhaps in the infrastructure bill. What's good about these kinds of things? Number one, earmarks bring broader buy-in to legislation. It's really difficult for a member of Congress to oppose a larger bill if there's some important projects that are from that are in their communities. And what's interesting about this process, this community funding process, is that it's going to require buy-in from the communities. Chambers are particularly well served here by being able to show support for important projects in your community. So later on, when you're talking to Cruz and when you're talking to Cornyn, when you're talking to Pete later on, talking about projects that are important, developing, letters, analysis, things like that, can show community buy-in for these important projects. And that's one of the really interesting things that's going to be a little bit different on this sort of revisit of the earmark process. I think that members are trying away from just sheer pork barrel, which certainly seemed to get out of hand the last time. But showing need for important projects seems an interesting way to do things, and like I said, an interesting role for chambers to come together. So, there's other parts of the Biden agenda that could be bipartisan. Infrastructure is going to be the big thing for the next several months. The U.S. Chamber has got our Build by the 4th of July campaign that I know Bill knows an awful lot about. We'd like to see an infrastructure bill get done by then. That's a stretch goal. Whether we can actually get done by the 4th of July, I think is going to be difficult. But look, we can do it. Then there's issues related to climate that could come up in the infrastructure bill. More money for dealing with green and renewable energy conservation, some infrastructure stuff. That makes a lot of sense. I think the way that we've characterized it has been that infrastructure could be an opportunity for a climate bill, perhaps not the climate bill. Carbon tax, cap and trade, the meat and potatoes of what a climate bill needs to look like probably would be better done going through regular order and trying to get buy-in. Forcing it through on an infrastructure bill, I don't know that that's a great idea. Some of the components I think are a good thing. And again, here's some moment for optimism. The Senate this week is going to deal with a water infrastructure bill, drinking water, wastewater. On the one hand, dealing with lead pipes, some money for that. We know that there's that problem out there. On the other hand, dealing with infrastructure in a changing climate, make sure that the infrastructure on the water side is resilient. That bill came out of committee unanimously. That bill is going to get off the Senate floor with a big bipartisan vote this week. So that's good. Rural broadband also in the infrastructure, dealing with telecommunications. We've all spent a lot of time on Zoom. My son is upstairs dealing with high school right now. We know in many communities that is not a great workable option, and getting more money out there for broadband is a huge priority. In the infrastructure bill, that could be great. We've got some immigration and workforce issues, not in the infrastructure bill, but where there is bipartisan capability to get some things done. That's going to be a little bit further down the road. I don't see that before July 4th, but that's one of the areas that we want to talk about. So, the business community has an opportunity to play in the space. At the U.S. Chamber, we've been trying to create opportunities for Republicans and Democrats to work together. Early in the year, we have our State of American Business event. That's where Tom Donahue and Suzanne Clark, Tom Donahue gave his last one, talk about their priorities and all the things that we need to see out of Congress in the administration in a year. We brought Congressman Katko and Spanberger to talk at that event. Congressman Katko is a Republican from New York, from Long Island, and Congresswoman Spanberger is a Democrat from Virginia. And they talked together about the need for bipartisanship. We've been doing Common Grounds events, bringing Republicans and Democrats together. The first one we did was on infrastructure. Like I said, we've been, banging on this issue of getting an infrastructure bill done by the 4th of July. We've looked at our political program and our scorecard to make sure that we're accurately reflecting the work of Republicans and Democrats who are getting really important things done. So we're doing that stuff in Washington. You're doing that stuff at home. It really brings me great pleasure to hear about the rest of the day that you're doing, where you're meeting with your entire congressional delegation. And I hope that you're telling them that we want to see Washington get some things done. That's really, really important. So there are some opportunities for optimism. But then we meet the cold, hard reality of the Senate. And there's going to be a food fight in the Senate over the idea of over cloture and filibuster. And like I said, I got to talk about this stuff. If I was in person, I would have a slide that said, and the audience participation point, I'd flash the Jeopardy slide that says this procedural tool speeds up the Senate. and then everybody would have to say what it is. That procedural tool is cloture. It's the filibuster. It's filibuster reform. It's all of these things. It's that 60 vote threshold. Getting to 60 is a tool that speeds up the Senate. What would happen if the filibuster went away? The Senate becomes ungovernable. There's lots of legislation, even now, that gets more than 60 votes. There's going to be a water bill on the floor, like I said, appropriations bills, highway bills, defense authorization bills. There's lots of legislation in a presidential year, in an evenly divided year, in a partisan year that gets done with more than 60 votes. Last year, there was a big climate and energy bill that got done. Why aren't we hearing more about it? Because it was passed 81-11 as part of the year-end omnibus bill. The USMCA got done 89-10. 4 phases of COVID legislation got done with big bipartisan majorities. So the Senate can get stuff done with more than 60 votes when they want to. What is important about cloture? Cloture is something that dates to 1917. President Wilson, in the run-up to World War I, wanted to arm merchant ships. He was worried about US merchant ships getting sunk by German U-boats and wanted to put guns on them. There were 12 senators who filibustered that legislation. 12 senators killed that proposal. So the Senate changed the rules. They created this cloture thing where 2/3 of senators present and voting could end debate on a measure. Without this cloture tool, senators can talk forever on issues, and they have. The number has gone from 67 to 60 over time. Right now we're at 60 on cloture. We all know that. The cloture thresholds for executive and judicial nominees have been reduced to 50, but we've been in this world for 60 for a long time. Now, many Democrats will point out, and even former President Obama and current President Biden have reflected on the racial nature of cloture. There's no way around that. In 1946, 5 Southern Democrats blocked consideration of the Fair Employment Practice Committee reauthorization. This was a New Deal era program to prevent workplace discrimination, and a filibuster killed that. In 1957, Strom Thurmond had a filibuster for 24 plus hours on the Civil Rights Act of 1957. So he was on the floor for more than 24 hours on trying to kill a civil rights bill. What ended up happening with that bill? The filibuster was broken and that legislation passed. In 1964, there was a 75-hour filibuster of the landmark Civil Rights Act. That bill, that filibuster lasted 75 hours. There were 18 senators who tried to kill that bill. What ended up happening? That bill, cloture was invoked 71-29, and the bill passed 73-27. So big civil rights legislation, starting with the Kennedy and Johnson era bills, have come through the Senate and come through the filibuster. The master of the Senate, the Robert Caro book about Lyndon Johnson's presidency, it's a 4-inch thick book. It tells the story of how Lyndon Johnson, as majority leader and president, broke the filibuster to get this legislation through. Dave Hoppe, who was Senator Reed's chief of staff, and sort of one of the big users of the filibuster when they were in control, talks about the need for the filibuster and the need to be able to have cloture and get over that process. There's a lot of talk about the filibuster has grown out of control. The filibuster really was a tool that was used very, very sparingly up until about 1970. It was used a couple times a year. It's grown big since the 2000s. Cloture was filed 600 times last year. So just to get things done, overcoming a filibuster, blowing up cloture, having a cloture vote, it has gone to be a very, very big deal. This is something that Republicans and Democrats have done. Tom Daschle did it, Trent Lott did it, Bill Frist did it, Harry Reid did it, Mitch McConnell did it, and now Chuck Schumer is doing it. This process of getting to 60 is something that is awful frustrating, but it is something that both Democrats and Republicans have done in many ways to structure votes, to avoid difficult votes, and to sort of process and manage how things come through the Senate. Like I said, there's lots and lots and lots of things that get more than 60, but we need to, but we can do it. Why is it so important? Ron, why did you bore us for 7 minutes of your short presentation, giving us the history of the filibuster? Who loses in a filibuster? Both sides lose if we get rid of the filibuster, but the business community has a lot at stake if we lose on the filibuster. Look at some of the things that could come up in just the next couple of months. So number one, there's stuff that we need out of the government. We're going to need tax reform, COVID legislation, infrastructure legislation. Without the tool of cloture, we are really, really imperiled. Number one, playing offense, getting good legislation through the Senate. Without the filibuster, there's kind of chaos. You ever watch C-SPAN? Madam President, may I have unanimous consent to whatever? Madam President, I noticed the absence of a quorum. There are very, very, very rarely 51 warm bodies on the Senate floor. You need unanimous consent to get rid of that. Without cloture, without the filibuster, Republicans can object to a cloture and force the sergeant at arms to force senators to come to the floor. Committees can't meet without unanimous consent. Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell can't talk later in the day. They would have to talk during their leadership time. Readings of bills. We saw Senator Ron Johnson require the reading of the last COVID package. We could see that very, very often. Without a tool like cloture, allowing buy-in from the left and right on all of these big messages, on all of these big issues, there's no buy-in from the minority to let the majority get their way done on anything. So, Mitch McConnell has said as much. He's talked about scorched earth if the Democrats get rid of the filibuster. And, you know, we've seen this back and forth between partisan legislation. We saw Obamacare. We saw repeal of Obamacare. We saw the Trump tax cuts. We see the issue of repealing the Trump tax cuts. All of those things can happen without participation from the other party. What does that mean? We have less durable legislation. So we know that there's a lot of anger out there. An infrastructure bill that has 60 or 70 or 80 senators with some climate provisions, with some road and bridge infrastructure, with some telecommunications infrastructure, is a much more durable path than an infrastructure bill that is solely done on a partisan side, that includes a lot of the climate stuff, a carbon tax, a cap and trade, something like that, and a tax on businesses, an increase in the corporate tax rate to pay for it, because none of the Republicans went along. We'd be setting up ourselves for 2 years from now or 4 years from now, when majorities flip, for a debate on lowering taxes again. How do we as the business community plan in that scenario when the corporate tax rate goes to 28%, to 22%, to 25%, to 23.5%? We can't plan. When a climate bill goes from we're going to have a climate tax to not have a climate tax, to have a climate tax to not have a climate tax, we need to have that long-term durable legislation. And that's why filibuster cloture is a tool. It forces compromise. It forces the other side, the minority side, to at least have some buy-in. We've seen all of that stuff work on all the COVID stuff, the venue stuff that's coming out of the COVID bill. Again, the climate and energy bill that happened last year in appropriations, highway bills in the past, appropriations just keeping the light on. So there's a lot of issues that are out there. There's a lot of hope for optimism that's tempered by a lot of the partisan talk that we have. But I think the best thing that we can do, and the best thing that you can do when you're talking with your delegation, is we want you to get things done. We'd like you to overcome the partisanship to the extent that you can, and let them know that you're here to help. These events are really, really important. You talking with your legislators and trying to get things done, talking about the issues that are important in Washington, not giving up on just throwing your hands up, enduring me bore you with 10 minutes of filibuster talk is really important. So I applaud all that you do. You know, it's not often that I get the opportunity to talk to a 5-star accredited chamber. It's not often that I have that opportunity because there just aren't that many of them. 5 stars is a huge, huge accomplishment. I think it's great and really a compliment to you all that you're investing in your chamber, that you're coming together as the business community to work on these things. So I'm glad to be with you. This time next year, I look forward to seeing you on the Hill, getting together in purpose, having the Bloody Marys in purpose, in person. And maybe we can open it up, Shannon and Bill, and start getting into some questions.
Ron, thank you. Take a breath. That was
Yeah.
that was remarkable, and I think we all had a master class in part of the importance of parliamentary procedures in the U.S. They are really important, and you're right. I mean, we want to encourage bipartisan solutions because we know that will, as you say, result in more durable legislation. And the uncertainty that flip-flops bring really clouds investment planning and investment cycles. So we get the message. So let me kind of open it up. We don't have such a large group that we need to use chat, but if you want to ask a question of Ron, if you'll just kind of unmute and raise your hand, I'd appreciate it. Don't be shy.
Bill, I have a question.
Yeah, Randy.
Ron, where does, has the chamber taken a position yet on our infrastructure proposal that was released recently?
So we haven't, so we've said nice things about it. And I think the position that we want to be in, and this is the U.S. Chamber, I think, the business community more generally, is that we want to be supportive and constructive to being able to get something done. I think that there are more than 60 votes for the core piece of an infrastructure package, sort of roads and bridges. I think that there's even bipartisan consensus on the House side as well. So I think that that's really, really good. The big question becomes, how do you pay for that? And that's one of the big challenges that's out there. We've talked about the gas tax for an awful long time. There's talk about doing a vehicle miles traveled issue. Give a shout out to Senator Cornyn's staff. When you talk with them later on, we've been engaging with them on some ideas to try to figure out ways to pay for this. So there's a lot of consensus, I think, broadly on what that core package would look like. I think that there's also a broad consensus on some of those add-ins would be. So certainly, rural broadband. I'd be very, very surprised if there isn't some money in an infrastructure package for that. It just makes sense. Beyond that, looking at some of climate and infrastructure together, some of that stuff could be done as well. I don't want to scare people on what that is. That's just, good common sense, making sure that we have greater transmission to make sure that we're getting, the United States has done a great job bringing renewables, solar, wind, online. One of the big challenges we have is getting that electricity from where it's produced to where it's needed. So some nods in that direction. So, So we haven't said a lot aside from this is good news and keep talking. Like I said, I think the really notable thing is the degree to which Chairman Capito and Joe Manchin have been talking about this stuff. That's really good. We're having a Democrat engage with the Republicans. Joe Manchin has been supported quietly by some of his colleagues as well. If we can get, sort of the optimistic note, if we can get a bipartisan package out of the Senate, and I think the House is looking at that, that's remarkable. I think, whether you voted for Joe Biden or not, he's going to be president for the next 4 years, and there's lots of things that the business community would like to see done. And if you can get some momentum for the business community and infrastructure bill, that would be great. And then, I didn't talk enough about taxes, but the corporate rate is a big piece of discussion. And then there's lots of other smaller issues out there where there's a big, you hear, other ideas to basically gouge the business community on whether it's individual taxes that are important to individual sectors, going after, waste, fraud, and abuse, which is never a good thing, but how that manifests itself could be a big tax increase on small businesses. So bipartisan is great. Let's build off that foundation, because when that foundation gets too far away from this bipartisan approach into this bad tax stuff, this bad policy stuff that's really got the business community in their sights, that's when we really start to have problems. So why we haven't said a lot about the Republican approach or the Democratic approach or those kinds of things is we want to treat members of Congress like we treat our children and our pets. We want to reinforce good behavior, and we want to applaud good behavior. They're talking, they're trying to come up with something, and we want to encourage that as much as we can. So that's sorry for filibustering a relatively straightforward question.
Thank you.
Ron, there was a question posted in chat by James Ramsey. When do you anticipate that the Capitol is going to open back up?
I don't know. As someone who works in Washington, D.C., we don't have great answers to that. And as someone who, just in my personal life, I really love living in Washington, D.C., really gives me a great heartache. So they're going to go too long. Number one, already it's been too long. And I think they're going to continue to go way too long. And I think that there's two reasons for that. Number one is COVID and getting through the COVID crisis and all of that kind of stuff. I think the politicization of some of the COVID stuff has not helped in that score. So keeping the Capitol shut down is partly a response to COVID. As members of Congress and their staffs continue to get vaccinated and numbers go down, that driver will go away. I think also looking for opportunities to take the temperature down. There's been a couple of different perimeters over time. After January 6th, there was a big fence. And, if you've been to Washington, D.C., the fence started basically the block past the Native American Museum. So well off Capitol Hill, a couple of blocks down the hill. They went all the way over to Union Station. And then on the House side of the hill, they went way beyond the House buildings. So sort of the parking lots behind the Cannon building, and then all the way to the blocks behind the Supreme Court. So it was a huge area. Your commuter buses to get back and forth from southeast to southwest, you live in Washington, you go back and forth, those buses couldn't go, and northeast and northwest. So some of that has come down. That's a good thing. But business as usual, I think, is going to be a long way off. We've got President Biden speaking to the joint session this week. I think, number one, the tone that he sets in that speech And then number two, the response to that from Republicans and sort of what the tone of that is and what the temperature is, I think is going to be an important marker. So some of the things that we're going to see this week, but just walking around Capitol Hill, I think that we're still probably weeks from that, if not months.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in our state capitol, and you were mentioning earlier about just being able to walk the halls and run into staff or being in the cafeteria. That's gold. I mean,
Yes.
for somebody who's trying to advocate, just having not just chance encounters, but walking into an office and spending a little time. I mean, it's absolutely critical to advocacy, and it's just not easily done, in kind of this virtual environment. So,
I was taking a delegation. We had a delegation in town, and we were going into the Senate side to have a meeting with McConnell's staff, and I don't remember what was going on the Hill that day, but there was some high profile event. I don't know if the vice president was up or there was an ambassador up, but the Capitol Hill, and this is a couple of years ago, but the Capitol Hill police were much more tense than normal. And, it was an unsophisticated delegation that I was with. People who hadn't been on the Hill before, and they were frustrated that they couldn't, just walk in and do all these things. And I'm like, look, Capitol Police have a really, really difficult job. On the one hand, they need to keep their members of Congress safe, and this is before January 6th and the insurrection. But every couple of years, something really wacky and bad happens on the Hill. A couple of years ago, there was a woman in mental distress who was driving her car with her kids in it, who ended up getting shot right outside the Hill because they thought she was a terrorist. There was a gunman who came in right outside Tom DeLay's office and shot a couple of Capitol Police officers. So the Capitol is a target, and we know that. So they need to protect the members of Congress. On the other hand, they have to facilitate our First Amendment rights to go in and petition our government for redress of our grievances. And they take that responsibility very, very seriously too. Access is a really, really important part of that process. And this shutdown, it affects me from a business perspective, and I can't get in and talk. I can Zoom with members of Congress and their staff, but your ability to come up and do your fly-in, next year, I hope it's back to normal, but being able to, go in and sit in Senator Cruz's office and go in and talk with Pete is really important. And Zoom can't replace that. So I'm sorry to go on a little bit of a tirade here. So it can't get back to normal soon enough for me, and I think for all of us.
So with respect to the president's speech tomorrow night, two things. One, do we know yet who's going to deliver the Republican?
Yeah, Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina.
Okay, thank you. And then the second is, do you think that he's going to expand upon his view for the human infrastructure bill?
Yeah, I think that he is. And, this comes up in a lot of different contexts. This comes up in the caring economy. We sort of put that in as one of the big challenges that could come up in the infrastructure bill. You sort of see this stuff, in years past in the Green New Deal. But there's I think that the progressives, it's like I was talking earlier on. I think that progressives are frustrated because they want to see a lot of stuff get done. And they don't know when they're going to have the opportunity to do this again. And what is this? It's all the different kind of things that are in there. We're talking about Medicaid buy-in, Medicare buy-in, Medicare for all, healthcare, free college. All of these really big ticket things. Who's going to pay for all of those things? That's going to be the business community. And how do we address all these things? A big part of that is that many of those things can come through budget reconciliation. And again, to get back into this boring procedural stuff, But the budget reconciliation process only requires 50 or 50 plus Vice President Harris to get done. Budget reconciliation can really go to tax issues, not exactly spending issues, but sort of tax and revenue issues. It's part of the budget process. But there isn't a need for Republican buy-in. That's a double-edged sword. So, Democrats can achieve a lot of their priorities, but then it's a knockdown, drag-out fight to get, senators like Manchin, senators like Sinema. There's another 4 or 5 or 6 senators that are necessary to be in that 50 who don't really want to be in that 50. So I do expect him to talk about that. I think what the note is going to be is how aggressive that talk is. Is this come hell or high water? These are things that we're going to do, or these are things that we want to try to figure out how we get done. So I think that's going to be, I think that's going to be one of the notable sections of the speech.
Solomon Israel posted in chat that he understands there's going to be a Democratic response to the president. Do we know?
Yeah, there is, and I haven't seen who's going to do that, but you're going to have sort of the progressive response.
Yeah, so it'd be maybe AOC or Bernie or somebody like that. Okay.
Of that ilk, yeah.
It's the guy actually that just unseated the other Democrat. He's also from Long Island.
I'll think of it in a moment.
But I haven't seen it.
Yeah,
but you see, this has been one of these things that's sort of amped up in the recent past. You used to see the president's budget, and then you'd see the majority House or the majority, budget, and then you'd see the Congressional Black Caucus budget, for example, or the Blue Dog budget. And we've kind of gotten into that with these speeches and responses. I think that the Republican response will be important because of whether the degree to which it offers an olive branch for bipartisanship. Beyond that, there's lots of speeches and it's a lot of talk, and I don't think that there's a lot of new things in there. It's just a reflection of where people are and what they want to see. But Biden and Pelosi and Schumer have a difficult job. They have a very, very diverse set of caucuses on the House and the Senate side, and they've got an extremely loud progressive caucus on the House side. And they have an extremely narrow majority. I mean, they got a single-digit majority on the House side, smaller than they had last year under President Trump. Keeping all of their ducks in a row is really, really difficult for them.
Well, Ron, I can't thank you enough for spending this hour with us and giving us a good, excellent overview of what's going on in Capitol Hill and the dynamics and how it affects the business community. I can assure you that we will stay engaged as a Chamber of Commerce and the local business community on all these issues and in partnership with the U.S. Chamber. Again, I want to thank our sponsors, Texas Instruments, Dallas College, Atmos Energy, the City of Richardson, National Write Your Congressman, and Charter Communications for their support for our federal policy briefings. As a reminder, we have Senator Cruz himself at 1:30 today, and at 2 o'clock we have Kirk Burgee with the FCC. Just a little parenthetical note on Ted Cruz. Back when he was first elected, as you know, he upset David Dewhurst, who was Lieutenant Governor of Texas at the time, who everybody thought would easily get elected as a U.S. Senator. And back to the discussion on redistricting, that was when the maps began to change and the courts delayed the primary vote. And the result was that it got pushed way into July of that particular year. And Ted Cruz upset David Dewhurst because his people were more motivated to go to the polls. This chamber was the first chamber to give Ted Cruz a public podium after he was sworn in as U.S. Senator. And we don't always agree with Senator Cruz, but he's been very faithful in terms of receiving our delegation. And so we're pleased for that. It's always good to have an open line of communication. And so in any case, remember that we've got Senator Cruz at 1:30, Kirk Burgee at 2 o'clock. And Ron, thank you to you and the U.S. Chamber for all the great work that you do. And we're adjourned for this session today. Thanks.